Yes, I'm Stuart Armstrong. I'm working on a lot of things, but currently mainly on AI risk. And I got involved with the Future of Humanity Institute because it's all the problems it deals on are so fun. I mean, doom, the destruction of the human race, and artificial intelligence, nuclear war. What's not to like about it? And so I got involved there, and they eventually made me care, and so now I'm stuck. I did, but it's sort of like a sort of just general charity sort of. Well, it's cool and it's a good thing to do, and let's do it there. And now sort of do expected utility calculations for charity and stuff like that, and realize, yes, actually this is probably the most important thing to put all your effort into. Okay, first of all, there's a lot of statistics in understanding risks, and knowing, understanding statistics and understanding its weaknesses and limitations is quite important. The other thing is that there's a lot of bias in understanding risks. So if you just go with someone's gut instincts, it's generally not going to be very good. So what that means is that to try and improve this, you generally have to try and make your risk estimates into a model, even an imperfect one, or even a simplistic one. That's generally an improvement over gut instinct. And putting ideas into models is kind of what mathematicians, or some mathematicians, do all the time. And understanding how models work and their limitations, and thinking within the logic of the models is also very useful. I mean, there's a great overlap also between maths and philosophy, thinking in categories, deducing logical implications, testing the model, finding the contradictions, finding the implicit assumptions. That's one thing where, since mathematics is basically totally rigorous, you need to be able to go through the argument and flesh out every tiny bit, lest there's a tiny missing chink that'll explode the whole thing. And that kind of discipline is very useful when taking apart philosophical arguments or prediction arguments. So what are the assumptions? What will make it break? What are we not saying here? Well, first of all, our studies showed that there wasn't a tendency to predict that AI would happen just within your lifetime. There was no strong pattern there. There was a quite strong pattern to predict that AI would happen within 15 to 25 years, systematically, and going back to the failed predictions as well. The main thing is that very few of the predictions actually presented a fully coherent argument for when AI was going to happen. I mean, some of the worst were just, I feel that AI will happen at this point, or it would be unreasonable to suppose that we won't have AI at that point. Others were sort of Moore's law, by certain time there'll be as many floating operations per second as there are neurons, or something like that, and then we'll have AI at that point, without doing the argument as to why, when we have that capacity, suddenly artificial intelligence will emerge. Because it's not like we have artificial intelligence now that's just too slow to run. And yeah, so a lot I've really come to appreciate, say, the uncertainties in the prediction and how poor we intrinsically are at predicting AI. Not of any fault of the predictors, it's just there's nothing really for them to train their intuition on. No feedback, no. We've not seen a single AI in the history of the world. We are trying to build something, we don't know what it is, and then trying to ask people when we're going to build something that we don't know what it is extremely difficult. So that's why I said that philosophy and some other methods actually tell you more about artificial intelligence than timeline predictions, because we can do some meta reasoning, like what Omohundro has done in his basic AI drives, that shows that minds with certain properties will have certain other properties and will maybe want is the wrong word, but will act to acquire certain resources and have certain interim goals, no matter how they're built. So I basically feel that we can actually say more about an AI than we can say about how it's going to be built and when it's going to be built. I mean, the uncertainty cuts both ways. We're very uncertain about the date of AI does not mean AI will happen in a long, long time. It also means that we might have a sort of philosophical or mathematical breakthrough in 2 years' time that leads to an AI in 3 years' time, 3 years beyond that. That's not inconceivable either. What would probably convince me that we knew the timeline of AI is if we had something that is a plausible AI design, and maybe one that's shown to work, that there's broad agreements in the AI community that this would work, and that it's just a question of faster computers, resources, time, or whatever, and then the AI will work. So a kind of theory of AI mind that there's a consensus that yes, finally this has solved the problem. There's a special case which is sort of whole brain emulations, which involve copying human brains and instantiating them on a computer. There I could imagine getting much more plausible timelines, with some results from neuroscience, some results from scanning technology. And then it might be very plausible that people could come together and say, actually, we'll have this in 30 years' time once the computers get fast enough to run these things. So there are a few situations where the timelines would collapse. But my impression, especially for just general AI, is that we'll only have a definite timeline when we're really quite close to it. So probably less than 5 years before it, because before that, any plan for AI, we just don't know. We just don't know what's going to be missing from it.
Okay.
So I think we'll only really know that AI is coming if it's nearly there, say within 5 years' time. Because otherwise, what we'll have is someone has a brilliant plan and they say this will build AI, but people have had brilliant plans and said that it'll build AI many times before, and they haven't realized the obstacles that are missing. So probably, unless there's a really good theory, probably we'll only know that we're on that AI is coming when we're on the verge of it. It really depends partially on how the AI is developed and what the consequences are going to be and what the likely consequences are presented to. I mean, like, we have an AI. This is a neat thing that suggests religious and philosophical debate. We have an AI, it's going to solve all the world's problems. That's a completely different debate. We have an AI, it's going to make everybody unemployed. That's another debate. And it might actually be all these things at once. So there can be a lot of different reactions to the news. For instance, there might be a military AI. People would react differently to that, to an academic one, to a commercial one. And also it might be a more gradual process. We might have the dumb AI butlers, and suddenly they're Jeeves, and suddenly they're way beyond Jeeves. And if we've had several years with robot butlers, then people will react to this differently than if this bursts upon the world. And if we're looking at the more powerful end of the AI spectrum, the sort of really super intelligent AIs, then to some extent the public reaction doesn't matter. It's the key decisions are going to be made by the ones very close to the AI project and a few circles beyond that. And that's what's going to determine basically the future of AI and the ultimate future of humanity, nearly completely irrespective of what people on the street feel about it. If it's not so super intelligent AI, then how it gets integrated into society and how people react to it becomes a lot more important. Expert predictions for AI timelines don't show any particular signs of being all that accurate. Expert predictions about other aspects of AI, like what it's going to be like, how it might behave, how it might be controlled, what it might want to do. Well, those we don't know yet because we don't have an AI, but those seem to be fairly solid, sort of philosophically and technologically. To a large extent, though, non-experts don't actually have much to bring to the table in terms of predictions. I mean, it is a technical subject. You wouldn't turn to non-experts in, designing nuclear weapons and predicting climate change and all those sort of things. So definitely non-experts and sort of contribute to the group, take part, but it is a technical subject. There's a variety of different approaches. All of them basically require advanced mathematical knowledge of one sort or another. Some of them require advanced computer science backgrounds. So ideas is probably the best contribution of non-experts. Ideas, suggestions, crazy ideas are perfectly fine because extending the set of things that we think about is very valuable. But don't be offended if the expert says, yes, we've heard that before. No, that's not what's going to happen. I mean, I don't know if overconfidence is a cognitive bias, but that's the biggest thing that you can see. Everybody is, or so many people are sure that this approach is the one that's going to work. This approach is the one that's not going to work. AI will happen definitely by this date. AI will never happen, or it's definitely not by this date. This argument is ridiculous. This argument is rock solid. We sort of talk about near mode and far mode in AI. So there's kind of a propensity to think of AI in sort of certain idealized forms. Like maybe, like often the idea of robot rights comes up, and the idea is this is a mind, it's new there, it must have rights. And that's sort of a popular science fiction trope as well. But that idea is not generally then taken apart and analyzed. Like this makes sense if this is a human mind. What if this is basically not a human mind? What if it has no emotions, nothing resembling consciousness, is just a phenomenal predicting, calculating machine? What if it does have emotions that are really extraordinarily strange? What if it doesn't fit into the sort of rights paradigm that we have? What if its preferences are just so weird that it makes no sense to interact with it that way? Finally, what if it's extremely dangerous? Criminals have rights, rights to a fair trial and stuff like that. But once they've been convicted, they lose a lot of rights. People working in extremely dangerous industries have, in a certain sense, a lot less rights than people on the streets do. You have Official Secrets Acts. You have don't copy stuff from your work computers to your home computers. So whether, I'm not saying that thinking of robot rights is wrong, I'm just thinking that you shouldn't hear AI immediately jump to robot rights without doing the analysis and breaking down of that ideas. So it's kind of leaping to the sort of closest paradigm is probably the problem. Like some people who are convinced of the risk of AI leap immediately to the Terminator because it's a robot, well, it's an artificial intelligence, it's dangerous, it's Skynet. Or dangerous robots are Skynet, Skynet is ridiculous, so dangerous robots don't exist. So it's the propensity to sort of not take the ideas apart, not analyze the actual consequences of it, and not analyze, well, what if my model's wrong? What would make my model right? What would make my model wrong? So if you're thinking of Skynet, you're thinking of, okay, how would this happen? And then you start asking, well, okay, Skynet, super intelligent, why does it build robots? If it wants to spy on humans, tiny camera drones seem the efficient way to do it. If it wants to kill humans, well, burn the atmosphere, use nukes, use nanoplagues. Clunking human-sized robots are completely the wrong solution to this problem. So if you do a bit of analysis and you realize, okay, so Skynet plus Terminator is not likely to happen. And then you might say, well, so okay, is Skynet itself likely or not likely? And then you can start branching out on that problem. And as I said, overconfidence, so the certainty that this particular model is the right one or that particular model is the wrong one, without deep analysis. I mean, there's also ideology. If you're a great believer in, say, human rights, which incidentally I am, then there's a tendency to see, say, confining a dangerous AI is bad because this is akin to racism for humans. Racism for humans is bad, therefore this is bad. But again, this doesn't involve a deep just a simple thought experiment. What if the robot was designed or evolved to really like being confined to boxes? It seems like actually if we were half decent programmers and we're trying to keep it in a box, we'd want it to like being kept into a box. And our our sort of calibration, there's a certain balance between, say, rights and, say, governments or intrusions on those rights, which is calibrated to human society. So in the UK, you don't generally have guns. In the US, you have guns, but people don't have the right to personal bazookas or personal nukes. And that's been calibrated to make a viable society. You then bring in an AI, and an AI, if it's the super intelligent type, an AI could possibly wreak huge havoc on the entire planet with an internet connection. So then if you wanted to calibrate a sort of balance there, you'd say, well, don't give it an internet connection. If you're thinking in human terms, this human is dangerous, don't give them an internet connection, don't let them talk with anybody. That would be extraordinarily cruel. But that's because a human can't destroy the entire planet with an internet connection. Maybe if, by analogy, this guy had the codes to set off a nuclear war in Russia and the USA, and could send out those codes over any internet connection, well, there we'd say, don't let him do it. Maybe that's the more appropriate analogy. In many cases, it's because they didn't give a full prediction. The example I gave you, where at some point computers will have as many floating point operations per second as a human brain, and then we'll get AI. Now that sounds like a prediction, and it even sounds somewhat rigorous because you've got a timeline on it. But what's missing is floating operations per second to AI. We have no justification for assuming that artificial intelligence requires equal amounts of floating operations per second as the human mind, or that when we get there, we'll be able to implement that. So what went wrong there? Well, it's kind of a failure of imagination? A failure of, predicting when AI will happen is extraordinarily hard. Trying to construct an argument backed up by what little evidence we have is extraordinarily hard. An analogy I give is try to predict when someone will solve the Riemann hypothesis. And here it's even harder, because the Riemann hypothesis, at least we know what the problem is and what a solution would look like. Here we don't know. So we're trying to predict when people will solve a problem that we don't know exactly what it is. But when you're confronted with things like that, people often say something, and people often sort of flee from the difficulty. And there might be another tendency, which is it's very hard to imagine that something is possible but will take a long time to achieve in some situations. Like if Leonardo da Vinci, he had models for helicopters, I don't think they would have worked, but imagine Leonardo da Vinci trying to predict an airplane and looking around Renaissance Italy and trying to think, yes, an airplane will happen, but an airplane will happen after an industrial revolution, and a petrol revolution leads to completely different sources of energy, and materials will have advanced to the degree that these things can start being constructed, and aerodynamics and science will have advanced to the extent that we can build control surfaces and model how objects move through the sky. So it's basically impossible that he could have done that. So yeah, so it is hard to say with very great certainty, yes, we'll have an AI in 100 years. No, we won't have it in 80 years, for instance. So where could that come from? Well, it's the only way that you could have that is if you're convinced we have an approach that works. We don't have the computing power to do it yet. That will happen in 90 years' time, or something along those lines. But otherwise, that is not a position that's really tenable. So if you do believe that AI is possible, then you can't sort of project into your mind all the technological cycles that are necessary, all the failed approaches that we're going to go through, and yeah, all the difficulty that's going to come ahead. And so since you can't model the difficulty, you kind of just either pick a date that's sort of 3 technological cycles ahead, 15 to 25 years times, say, or you just pick a date that feels right. The general point for everyone is that the timeline predictions for AIs are very unreliable. In theory, there's no reason to expect that anyone's individual prediction is going to be any good. And in practice, they're all over the place and they contradict each other, so the vast majority of them are not good. That's the general message. So we should, as I say, increase our uncertainty on that in both directions. We might have a breakthrough very soon. I mean, we have theoretical models of AIXI, for instance, or AXITL, which are plausibly arguable to be absolutely top perfect intelligences, with a few caveats. They're extraordinarily and stupidly inefficient. There's no sensible way you could build anything like this. However, maybe someone will find a computable variant tomorrow, and code this up, and then it's runnable on current software, current hardware, and after a bit of debugging and a little bit of research, we have our working AI in 6 months' time. I don't think this is particularly likely, but it's possible. Or similarly, the problems may be so huge that within 100 years' time, we still haven't got anywhere close. Though at the high end, there's the whole brain emulations, the brains on computers, which have more solid timelines. And barring some things that seem unlikely based on current science, like that we need to model deep into the individual neurons, then at about 100 years, you get a very strong probability that those will happen. But sort of booking ends between 5 and 100 years, there your uncertainty should be great. Second thing that probably should be taken is to look at, if someone gives a timeline prediction or any sort of AI prediction, maybe about AI behavior, is to look at how that prediction is constructed. Are there sort of proper arguments? Are all the implicit assumptions stated? One main thing to see is, if this argument were wrong, what would you expect? If this argument were wrong, or if it were right, what difference would you expect to see in the world? Like, if someone says we'll have AI when AI has the same number of floating operations per second as the human brain, in a world where this is right and in a world where this is wrong, what would we expect to see differently? I personally can't really think of any differences that we'd expect at this point to see in those worlds. So I don't see how that argument on its own makes any sense. Now, if they start decomposing it, then maybe it's connected with the evidence and we can start making use of it. Now, the third thing is that even though we're terrible at predicting timelines of AIs, some of what some philosophers and some people at the SIG-INST and the FHI have been saying about AIs are worth taking seriously. At least enough that the AGI developers can understand the arguments and can counter them. Because the arguments are AGIs of all types of AIs or AGIs have generic dangerous behaviors. And it's not enough to just dismiss those arguments. One should look at them and say, this is where the argument is weak. This is where my AI design will not fall into this category. And if someone really understands their AI designs and really understands the risk arguments, then this should be relatively easy to do.